Download this code from codegive.com, link in the description below. Using Microsoft Graph API with Managed Identity in an Azure Automation Runbook. In this tutorial, you will learn how to access Microsoft Graph API securely using a managed identity in an Azure Automation Runbook. This approach eliminates the need for client secrets, enhancing security. Prerequisites. 1. Azure subscription, you need an Azure account. 2. Azure Automation account, you should have an automation account created in your Azure subscription. 3. Permissions, ensure that you have permissions to register and manage applications in your Azure AD tenant. 4. Managed identity, your Azure Automation account should have system-assigned managed identity enabled. Step 1. Enable managed identity for Azure Automation. 1. Go to your Azure Automation account in the Azure portal. 2. Under the Identity section, enable the system-assigned managed identity. 3. After enabling, make a note of the object ID of the managed identity. Step 2. Assign API permissions to the managed identity. 1. Go to the Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal. 2. Navigate to App Registrations and select the managed identity of your automation account. 3. Click on API Permissions and then add a permission. 4. Choose Microsoft Graph and then select Application Permissions. 5. Depending on what you want to do, select the necessary permissions, example user.read.all, group.read.all. 6. Click Add Permissions. 7. If required, click on Grant Admin Consent for the permissions. Step 3. Create a runbook. 1. Go to your automation account. 2. Click on Runbooks and then on Create a runbook. 3. Provide a name, select PowerShell as the type, and click Create. Step 4. Write the runbook code. Here's an example PowerShell code to get a list of users using Microsoft Graph API. PowerShell. Import the necessary module. $error action preference equals stop. Get the managed identity token. $resource equals https://graph.microsoft.com. $token equals get a success token resource URL $resource.token. Set the Graph API URI. $URI equals https://graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/users. Set the headers for the request. $headers equals @ authorization equals bearer $token. Make the API call. $response equals invoke REST method URI $URI method get headers $headers. Output the response. $response.value for each object. Write output user principal name, $user principal name. Write output display name, $display name. Write output --. Step 5, test the runbook. 1. Save the runbook and click on Test pane. 2. Click on Start to execute the runbook. 3. Monitor the output in the output pane to see the list of users retrieved from Microsoft Graph API. Step 6, publish the runbook. Once you have tested the runbook and it works as expected, remember to publish it. 1. Click on Publish to make the runbook available for future use. Step 7, optional, schedule the runbook. If you want to run the runbook on a schedule. 1. In the runbook, click on Schedules. 2. Click on Add a schedule and create a new schedule or link an existing one. Conclusion. Using managed identity with Azure Automation Runbooks to access the Microsoft Graph API allows you to streamline authentication securely without managing secrets. This tutorial showed you how to set up the required permissions, create a simple runbook, and interact with the Graph API. From here, you can expand your runbook to perform various tasks using other endpoints of the Microsoft Graph API. Tutorial: Accessing Microsoft Graph API using Managed Identity in Azure Automation Runbook. Overview. In this tutorial, we'll learn how to access the Microsoft Graph API using a managed identity in an Azure Automation Runbook. A managed identity allows your Azure resources to authenticate to other Azure services without storing credentials in your code. Prerequisites. 1. Azure subscription. You need an active Azure subscription. 2. Azure Automation account. Create an Azure Automation account if you don't have one. 3. Microsoft Graph API permissions. Ensure you have the necessary permissions to access the Graph API. You can find the permission requirements here: https://docs.microsoft.com/n-a/graph/permissions-reference. For managed identity, ensure that your Azure resources, like your automation account, have a managed identity enabled. Steps to access Graph API. 1. Enable managed identity for Azure Automation account. Go to your Azure Automation account. In the left pane, select Identity. Turn on the System Assigned Identity. Note down the object ID. 2. Grant API permissions to managed identity. Go to the Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal. Select App Registrations and search for Managed Identities. Find your managed identity and select it. Go to API Permissions and click Add a permission. Choose Microsoft Graph, then select the type of permission, delegated or application, based on your use case. Assign the necessary permissions, example user.read, mail.read, and click Grant Admin Consent to grant these permissions. 3. Create a runbook. In your automation account, select Runbooks from the left menu. Click on Create a runbook. Provide a name, select PowerShell as the type, and click Create. 4. Write the PowerShell code. Below is a sample code snippet that demonstrates how to authenticate with the managed identity and call the Microsoft Graph API to list users. PowerShell. Import the necessary modules. Note: Azure Automation should have the AZ module installed. Get the access token using the managed identity. $resource equals https://graph.microsoft.com. $token equals invoke REST method get URI http://localhost 50342/OAuth2/token. Resource equals $resource headers at metadata equals true. .access_token. Set the authorization header. $headers equals @ authorization equals bearer $token. Define the Graph API endpoint to get users. $URI equals https://graph.microsoft.com/v1.0/users. Call the Graph API to get the list of users. $response equals invoke REST method get URI $URI headers $headers. Output the result. $response.value for each object. Write output user, $_displayname, email, $_mail. Explanation of the code. Access token retrieval. The script retrieves an OAuth2 access token from the Azure Instance Metadata Service, IMDS, using the managed identity. Authorization header. The access token is included in the authorization header for the API call. API call. The invoke REST method cmdlet is used to call the Graph API endpoint to list users. Output. The script outputs the display name and email of each user returned by the API. 5. Publish and test the runbook. Save your runbook and click on Publish. After publishing, you can start the runbook by clicking Start. Review the output to ensure that the users are listed as expected. Conclusion. Using a managed identity to access the Microsoft Graph API in an Azure Automation Runbook is a secure and efficient method for automating tasks in Azure. This approach eliminates the need to manage secrets or credentials, allowing you to focus on automation and integration tasks. Additional resources. Azure Automation Documentation, https://docs.microsoft.com/n-a/azure/automation. Microsoft Graph API Documentation, https://docs.microsoft.com/n-a/graph/overview. Managed Identity Documentation, https://docs.microsoft.com/n-a/azure-identities-azure-resources/overview. This concludes our tutorial. Feel free to explore further functionalities of the Microsoft Graph API and enhance your automation scripts.